Hey, what's up, guys? Today we have a few scary Reddit stories that I'm really excited for you guys to hear. A lot of them are paranormal, so make sure you're prepared to watch this video, but it's not too scary, I hope. But yeah, we're trying to get to 100,000 followers by the end of the year, so I appreciate the support. Drop a comment on how you feel about these stories, and yeah, let me know if you guys have ever encountered anything like this. So let's just get right into it. I've been meaning to share this for a while, so hopefully someone can relate. If not, I'm not surprised. This is one of the weirdest things I've ever experienced in my entire life. I live in a relatively quiet suburb where everyone knows everyone and nothing much ever happens. At least it's what I thought until last year. I've been hesitant to share this, but after a lot of time, I've decided to write it down. Maybe someone out there can relate to me. About a year ago, a family moved into the house next door. The house had been empty for several years and it was starting to show signs of neglect. The new neighbors were a young couple with a small child, a boy around 6 or 7 years old. They seemed nice enough, although they kept to themselves. I waved a few times and got polite nods in return. Things were normal at first, but then I began to notice strange occurrences. It started with small things, lights flickering in their house, strange noises at night, and their dog barking constantly at seemingly nothing. I chalked it up to the house settling and the dog being in a new home. One evening, as I was taking out the trash, I saw the couple arguing in their driveway. They were speaking in hushed, urgent tones, and the woman looked terrified. I didn't want to intrude, so I quickly went back inside. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The next day, I saw the woman again. She was sitting on the porch, staring off into the distance. I decided to go over and check on her. As I approached, she seemed suddenly startled, and her expression softened when she recognized me. Is everything okay? I asked, trying to sound as casual as possible. She hesitated before responding. It's nothing, just the house. It's old and creaky. I nodded, though I wasn't convinced. I said, if you need anything, don't hesitate to ask. We're neighbors after all. She smiled weakly and thanked me. As I walked away, I couldn't help but feel the uneasy tension in the air. A few nights later, I was awoken by a loud bang. I sat up in bed, heart pounding, and listened. The noise seemed to be coming from next door. I looked out my window and saw shadows moving in their house. Curiosity got the best of me, and I grabbed a flashlight and went outside. As I approached their house, I heard muffled voices, frantic and distressed. I knocked on their door, and the noise stopped abruptly. After a few moments, the door creaked open, and the man stood there looking disheveled and exhausted. Is everything okay? I heard a loud noise. He blocked my view and forced a smile. Just some issues with the plumbing. Everything's fine. Thanks for checking. I nodded, though the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. All right, well, let me know if you need any help. He closed the door quickly, and I stood there for a moment trying to process what I just heard and what I'd seen. Something was definitely off, but I just didn't know. Over the next few weeks, things escalated. I heard screams in the middle of the night, followed by silence. The lights in their house would turn on and off at odd hours, and their dog seemed to vanish. I never saw it again, and it just seemed to disappear. One morning, I saw the woman again, but this time she had bruises on her arms. I wanted to ask her if she was okay, but she avoided my gaze and hurried back inside the second she saw me. I decided it was time to call the authorities. When the police arrived, they knocked on the door, but there was no answer. They went around to the back, and after a few minutes, they called for backup. A couple hours later, they brought out the family. The man was in handcuffs, and the woman and the child looked relieved but shaken. I thought this was the end of it, but then I started to hear things. At first, it was just a low hum, barely audible, but it grew louder. I heard whispers and footsteps in my house at night. I couldn't sleep, constantly feeling like I was being watched. I contacted the police again, but they found nothing. No signs of forced entry, no evidence of anyone ever being in my house. They suggested I might be experiencing stress or anxiety, especially after the incident next door. Then one night I woke up to see a figure standing by the foot of my bed. It was the boy from next door. His eyes were wide and vacant, and he was pointing toward the window. I blinked and he was gone. Shaking, I got up and looked outside. The house next door was dark, abandoned, just like it had been before they moved in. I decided to do some digging. I went to the local library and searched through old newspapers. What I found chilled me to the bone. Years ago, there had been a murder-suicide in that house. A man had killed his wife and children before taking his own life. The details were gruesome, and it happened in the very same room where I had seen the boy. I don't know if the family next door knew about the house's history, but it seemed like whatever evil was there had driven them to absolute madness, and now it was affecting me. I moved out shortly after, unable to stay in that house any longer. I still hear whispers sometimes late at night when the wind is just right. I don't know if it's my imagination or something more sinister, but I can't shake the feeling that the house next door is still watching me, waiting for its next victim. If you ever move into a new place, be sure to check its history. You never know what might be lurking in the shadows, waiting for someone to call it home. So, back when I was in high school, my family moved into a small town in the middle of nowhere. It was a pretty rural area, lots of forests and farmland. I didn't mind much. I liked the peace and quiet, and I've always been the outdoorsy type. One of my favorite things to do was go hiking in the woods behind our house. There was all of these overgrown trails that nobody used anymore, and I loved exploring them. It was like having my own private wilderness. One day, I decided to go on a longer hike than usual. I packed a lunch, grabbed my backpack, and headed out early in the morning. I was planning to follow this old logging trail that would lead deep into the forest. I'd never gone that far before, but I figured it'd be a fun adventure. The first few hours was great. The weather was perfect and the forest was beautiful. I saw deer, rabbits, and all sorts of birds. I was having a blast, but as I got deeper into the woods, I started to get this weird feeling like something was watching me. I shrugged it off at first, telling myself it was just my imagination. Then I came to this old abandoned cabin. It was just off the trail, hidden by trees and underbrush. I probably wouldn't have seen it if I hadn't been looking for a place to sit and eat my lunch. The cabin was falling apart, windows broken, roof caving in. Something drew me to it. I don't know what it was. Maybe it was just my curiosity, or maybe it was that weird feeling I just couldn't shake. I decided to go check it out. I figured I'd look around for a bit and then head back to the trail. As I got closer, I noticed the door was slightly apart. I pushed it open and stepped inside. The place was an absolute wreck. Broken furniture, moldy walls, the works. But what really caught my attention was the stuff scattered on the floor. There were these old rusted tools, pieces of clothing, creepiest of all, dozens of Polaroid photos. I picked one up and felt my stomach drop. The photo was of a person, a woman tied to a chair looking terrified. I looked at another. Same thing. Dozens of photos, all of different people, all looking scared out of their mind. My heart was pounding and I felt like I was going to be sick. I knew I had to get out of there. As I turned to leave, I heard the door creak behind me. I spun around and saw him. A man standing in the doorway blocking my exit. He was tall, with wild hair and dirty clothes. His eyes were wide and crazed, and he had this horrible grin on his face. "Found my collection, did ya?" he said, his voice raspy and rough. I couldn't move. I was frozen with fear. He took a step towards me. I knew I had to do something. I grabbed the nearest thing I could find, a rusty old wrench, and I swung it at him as hard as I could. He stumbled back, more surprised than hurt, and I took my chance. I bolted past him out of the cabin and ran as fast as I could down the trail. I didn't stop running until I was back at my house. I burst through the door, panting and shaking, and I told my parents everything that had happened. They called the police, and I spent the next few hours giving my statement and leading them to the cabin. They searched the place, and they found all the photos along with some other disturbing evidence. The man was long gone by then, but the police assured they'd do everything they could to find him, but they never ended up finding him. I never went back into the woods again. We moved away long after, and I've tried to put it all behind me, but sometimes I just still see his face in my nightmares, and I wonder if he's out there somewhere looking for his next victim, looking for me. So, yeah, if you're ever out in the woods and you get that feeling like you're being watched, trust your instincts. Get out there. You never know what or who might be lurking in the shadows. Hey Reddit, I need to share something that's been bugging me for years. When I was around 8, my family moved into a new house. It wasn't particularly old or creepy, just a regular suburban home. But one day, while poking around the attic, I found this old porcelain doll. It looked like it had been forgotten for ages. Its face was cracked and its clothes were faded. Being a kid, I thought it was cool and decided to keep it in my room. That's when the weird stuff began to happen. At first, it was small things, stuff going missing, strange noises at night. I never thought much of it. But then I started to see these really vivid nightmares. In the dreams, the doll would come to life, its eyes following me around the room, its mouth twisting into a creepy smile. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, the doll always sitting exactly where I left it, staring at me. I told my parents about the nightmares, but they said I had an overreactive imagination. They didn't believe me, even when I started finding scratches on my arms and legs that I could never explain to them. I tried to get rid of the doll. I threw it in the trash, buried it in the yard, but no matter what I did, it always found its way back to my room. As I got older, the The nightmares got worse. The doll would show up in different parts of the house, even though I never moved it. I'd hear it whispering my name at night, and sometimes I'd catch glimpses of it in the corner of my eye, its eyes glowing faintly in the dark. My parents were too wrapped up in their own problems to notice. My dad was working late every night, and my mom was drinking more and more. The whole vibe in the house was tense and oppressive, and it was a pretty bad environment. One night, after a huge argument between my parents, I woke up to find the doll sitting on my chest, its tiny hands wrapped around my throat. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. It felt like the life of me was being sucked out of me. Somehow, I managed to knock it off and scramble out of bed, gasping for air. I knew I had to do something before it was too late. I grabbed the doll and ran outside, not caring about the freezing cold. I made my way to the backyard and started a fire in the old barbecue pit. The doll seemed to shiver in my hands, its porcelain face cracking even more. I threw it into the flames, watching as the fire consumed it. For a moment, I thought I heard a scream, a high-pitched and inhumane scream, but I told myself it was just the wind. After that night, the nightmares stopped, and the atmosphere of the house slowly returned to normal. My parents eventually got divorced, but the tension had hung us over it was never lifted. I still think about that doll sometimes, and I can't help but wonder what it really was and where it came from. So if you ever come across something that feels off, something that makes your skin crawl and your instincts scream, listen to those feelings, don't just ignore them, and don't let anyone convince you it's all in your head. Some things are just evil, and it's better to be safe than sorry. I've never been one for sharing my personal experiences online, but after what happened to me last weekend, I feel like I need to get this off my chest. Maybe someone out there has had similar experience and can help me understand what exactly I saw. A bit of background. I love hiking. There's something about the tranquility of being surrounded by nature that clears my mind and soothes my soul. I often go hiking alone, despite the protests of my friends and family. They always warn me about the dangers of hiking solo, but I've always enjoyed the solitude. Last Saturday, I decided to explore a new trail. It's in a forest preserve about an hour away from my home. The trail was recommended by a friend who mentioned it had some beautiful, lesser known spots. The weather was perfect, and I set out early in the morning to make the most of the day. The first few hours were uneventful. The trail was well marked, and I passed a few other hikers along the way. Around noon, I reached a fork in the path. One direction led to a waterfall according to the sign, while the other seemed to head deeper into the forest. Curious and eager for a bit of adventure, I chose the latter. As I ventured further, the trail became narrow and more overgrown. I figured it was just less traveled, but I didn't mind. I was absolutely deep in the woods now, with no sounds of chirping birds and no rustling of leaves. It was peaceful, almost hypnotic. After about an hour, I came across an old, dilapidated sign that read Sawmill. It pointed down a barely visible path and diverged from the main trail. My curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to follow it. The path was difficult to navigate. With fallen branches and thick underbrush, it made the progress very slow. I almost turned back a few times, but something just urged me to keep going. Eventually, I stumbled upon the remains of an old sawmill. It was mostly just a few crumbling walls and some rusted machinery. It was fascinating nonetheless. I took some pictures and explored the area, feeling like I discovered a hidden piece of history. As I was about to head back, I noticed another, even narrower path leading away from the sawmill. Despite my better judgment, I decided to see where it led. The further I walked, the more uneasy I became. The forest around me seemed to grow darker, and an unnatural silence descended. It was as if all the wildlife was gone now. I felt like I was being watched, but I turned around and there was nothing there. After what felt like an eternity, I reached a small clearing. In the center was a large, perfectly round stone covered in strange carvings. I approached it cautiously, feeling a sense of dread that I couldn't quite explain. The carvings were intricate, depicting what looked like human figures in various states of agony and disparity. As I studied the stone, I heard a rustling sound behind me. I whipped around, but again, there was nothing there, just a swirl. The air felt thick and oppressive, making it almost impossible to breathe. I decided it was time to leave. As I turned back, I caught a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye. It was a shadow, but wasn't casted by anything I could see. It moved independently, slithering across the ground like a living thing. I froze. My heart was just... It felt like it was stuck in my chest. The shadow seemed to grow, spreading across the clearing and enveloping the stone. I watched in horror as the figures in the carvings began to writhe and twist as if it was coming alive. A low whisper filled the air, speaking in a language I couldn't understand. I wasn't sure if I was freaking out or if this was my imagination. Panic set in and I ran. I didn't care about the path or where I was going. I needed to get away. The forest seemed to close around me, the trees twisting and contorting in grotesque shapes. The whispers grew louder, echoing in my mind. I don't know how long I ran, but eventually I burst out of the main trail, nearly collapsing in relief. The sunlight felt like a warm embrace, and the sounds of the forest returned, grounding me in reality. It was like I had just entered a new universe. I made it back to my car and drove home in daze. I was unable to shake the feeling of being watched, especially after what had just happened. I haven't been able to sleep properly since that. Every time I close my eyes, I see the shadows and hear those whispers. I don't know what I encountered in those woods, but I do know one thing. I don't think I'll ever be hiking alone anytime soon. If anyone has an idea what that stone was or had a similar experience, please let me know. I just want to understand what happened to me so I can prevent you from ever facing the repercussions of it. That is the end of the video, guys. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed these 4 stories. They took a little bit to find, but I'm sure there's many more out there if you guys want to hear similar stories. Let me know if you guys want to hear something a little scarier, maybe something funnier, but yeah, I would really appreciate a subscribe. This is a new channel, so we are trying to hit that goal of 100,000 followers by the end of the year. But thank you guys for making it to the end, and love you guys, and I hope to see you back in the next video. Peace.